You're tuned in to Night Vision Radio, exposing the truth one secret at a time. Prepare yourself as we explore the shadow worlds of suppressed history, secret knowledge, forbidden religion, and shine a light on the conspiracies to keep it all from us. Welcome to Night Vision Radio. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Night Vision. I am your host, René Barnett. So glad that you could join us tonight. I was just remarking off air that, it's a strange time, a strange week here in the United States after a horrifying and bizarre weekend that we had in Charlottesville, Virginia. And then, of course, today, we're closely watching all the news out of Barcelona, and our hearts are there as well in Spain with all our friends there. So, gosh, it's hard to shake off those thoughts and that worry and all the feelings that are rising up in all of us. But I think that it's good for us to also take a break from it because we have to keep strong. So sometimes that entails getting into something that we enjoy, relaxing a little bit. And so I'm really looking forward to tonight's show. This is a brand new friend of mine. I met him last week. As some of you may have noticed, my boss, MJ, gave me a night off last week. And I took advantage of it by going on a show with some friends of mine out of New York. And the other guest on the line was my guest tonight, and we'd never met, and I suddenly familiarized myself with all his work. Subsequent to that show, we had a great conversation on the air, and I said, "You got to come on my show." So he graciously agreed to come on the very next week so we could continue our conversation. But I promise you, we won't leave anything out. We'll recap because we talked a lot about his work at Rosslyn Chapel, and since he's right down the road, he has a lot of access there that many of us don't. My guest tonight is author and researcher Brian J. Allan. Thank you for joining us from Scotland, Brian.
Hey, René, thank you very much for asking me along. I'm really looking forward to the show.
Well, I was so fascinated by so much of what you shared last week on Tim Beckley and Tim Schwartz's show out of New York that I said, oh my goodness, there are so many conversations that we could go to. Also, we discovered that we have a lot of friends in common, and even since our conversation on the radio show last week, I realized that we have another friend in common. My friend Brian Kennard down in Tennessee at Grave Distractions Publications.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. I'd forgotten all about him. I recall he put a couple of my books up online as ebooks. Yeah, that's Brian. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, known Brian for about 10 years. And met up with him on a few occasions, often at different events and things. And he's actually been on this show before, talking about one of his books that he has written. And of course, I have friends, including our mutual friend, Henry Lincoln, who now is being published by Brian in Grave Distractions. So, and Gloria Amendola, who's been on this show many times, and also Tim Wallace Murphy. All these wonderful authors are joining up with Brian. So I think that's really great. But I wanted to get into also the fact that I should mention, and I'll probably get killed if I don't, but you and I also contributed to a book that's just been put out recently by Hidden Treasures of the Knights Templar by Timothy Green Beckley, but it also has other contributors, including Brian and myself. And so now I guess I'm published. I've had a few magazine articles published, but I haven't contributed to a book before in this way. But anyhow, so I'm in wonderful company and honored to be. So Brian, gosh, you've just been, let's hear a little bit about your background before we get started on Rosslyn, because you're not just a Rosslyn researcher. You've got such a wide background, and including being the editor of Phenomenon magazine. So that must take you into many, many areas.
Well, yes, it does. Well, what's my background? Well, I've been in the paranormal field for decades and decades and decades. I guess I started off, in ufology, and then I realised that ufology and the paranormal, there is just no difference, or a very little difference. So I sort of drifted into the paranormal from there. But I found that the two, over the years, the links are unmistakable, and the extraterrestrial hypothesis just can't be demonstrated. But the problem is that the reality of other dimensions existing alongside our own other realities, and the fact that these things, I think, originate there rather than some other far-off star or star system. And I'm pretty sure that these things originate in other dimensions. And in all effect, there is no difference between an angel and an alien, or a demon for that matter. So, I guess that's what got me into it. But I started writing around 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. I started writing, brought my first book out, and I've been producing them pretty steadily ever since. So I'm on about my 12th or 13th book now. And
wow.
that is currently just been, it's with the publisher right now. And I'm just waiting for it to get the go-ahead, and we'll bring that one out. That one, the latest book is actually called The Phenomena Project, and maybe we can talk about that a little later.
Oh, yeah, we must. Yeah, I'm going to have to come over and take some writing classes from you. I think my problem is lack of focus and concentration. I think that's my big problem in taking on a project like a book. And also, I don't really consider myself necessarily expert in any of these fields, but you've done a lot of research in your particular areas and through your work as a journalist as well. But you said you started out and then you moved into the paranormal. Now, why did you move into the paranormal? Was that due to some kind of experience that you had, or was that just part of your research?
Well, I guess it was the fact that there were so many similarities between manifestations of ufology and the way that the entities that exist within the world of the paranormal operate, that I came to the conclusion that there was very little, if any, difference between the two of them. But I found that this point of view doesn't go down very well with dyed-in-the-wool believers in the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Because I guess they're kind of blinkered. And I think that's a great shame, because if they just open their worldview a little bit, that I guess they'd see the similarities that are unmistakably there. Because, I try to keep an open mind in all this, but sometimes having an open mind is not an advantage when you get into this field, which is sad.
Right. I agree with you, and even science, traditional science is now beginning. I've heard scientists, talking about the ideas of, other dimensions and parallel dimensions. It's, it seems to me it makes a lot more sense in some of these places that you and I have talked about before, places like Rosslyn and like the Skinwalker Ranch and even Rennes Chateau, where there does seem to be some scientific basis for some kind of phenomena that's going on that I don't believe, like you, is necessarily extraterrestrial.
Oh no, I think you're absolutely right. And the more I look at, pardon me, the more I look at this, the more similarities I see. But the fact that of editing Phenomena magazine, pardon me, it introduces me to all sorts of strains of thought from all over the world, because I get a pile of stuff sent in, for approval. Would we print this in a magazine? Would be interested in stuff, and some of these ideas are fascinating, and and we say, yeah, why not? Yeah, we'll print you to tidy it up and print it. But some of the stuff is really, really way out there, and it's probably better left where it is. But it does, the fact that editing a magazine and doing constant research for the books, it does help to keep an open mind on the subject, and I've learned an awful lot. I'm convinced, for example, that this life that we're living now is just a stopping point to another one, and there is no doubt that we just pass on to another reality when we die. So in many ways, death holds no fear for me anymore. It's because all I know is just a stopping point. It's just a way station on the journey.
Right. And how have you satisfied yourself that is indeed the case?
Well, this is going to sound a bit crazy, but I've held conversations with entities that live there or purport to live there, and I've come across the same concept, in not just in my own experiences, but in the experience of innumerable people across the globe. And I guess we can't all be wrong. So I think we pretty much are in contact with something, and it all seems to be pretty, cohesive, that all the stories seem to be the same or very, very similar. So like I say, I just wait to see what's coming.
Right. Now, if we could, go to Rosslyn now. You're there in Scotland, so I would imagine you've been there lots of times and done lots of extensive research there. And we talked about last week, and so we'll go over that again for these listeners, about the resonance in Rosslyn and those musical cubes that are there, and you've sort of been working with resonance there, and you also said that you felt like, or maybe you didn't just feel like, but that there is a portal at Rosslyn.
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely convinced there's a portal in Rosslyn Chapel. It's in what is called the Lady Chapel. It's right in front, or maybe it's part of the St. Matthew altar. Because just can I ask you first, René, have you been in Rosslyn Chapel?
I have not. I almost made it there one time, and I didn't quite make it that far north in the UK. But no, I have not been there. I've looked at many, many pictures, and spoken with lots of people connected with Rosslyn Chapel. But no, I haven't had the experience myself.
Well, okay. It's just that when you go in the chapel, at the east end of the chapel, okay, there are a series of altars. There's 3 altars in the Lady Chapel. Then there's a 4th altar, which is quite appropriately called the High Altar, because it is up high, which is in fact above the stairway going down into the crypt. And the St. Matthew altar is at the left-hand side of the Lady Chapel as you face it. And it's nothing. It's not a huge, big, fancy altar or anything. I guess it's about chest height, maybe about 5 foot, 4 foot 6 high, maybe about 4 foot wide, with a little lintel on top of it. And there's the engraved cross of the Sinclair family, which is carved upon it, and that is the St. Matthew altar. And that is where I am convinced that there is a portal. And I say that because I would physically, this was 1998. It was the first time we'd conducted anything like a full-scale investigation into the chapel. And I should tell the listeners that this is not a thing that's done at all now. People aren't allowed in the chapel to do this kind of thing now.
Sure.
Because there was too many people turning up and doing all sorts of weird stuff in there. And the trustees of the chapel just don't want it to happen. And as it was, we had to get special permission to do this anyway. And what to promise the trustees and the guy who was looking after it at the time, that we wouldn't be turning up wearing long cloaks and pointed hats with strange symbols on them and stuff, and it was all going to be pretty low key. So, and that's exactly what we did. But it ended up, when we were there, we went with two sets of mediums, two husband-wife teams of mediums. I went along with my wife and a couple other guys. And this is when in fact, the mediums were in separate teams, but both the teams, who had never met before, and neither had they been in the chapel before, they both identified this area in front of the St. Matthew altar as being something kind of special. And at one point, I was asked to go and stand. Would I like to stand there? And I said, well, yeah, sure, anything. And when I stood there, I couldn't keep my arms at my side. They kept floating up from my sides. It was the strangest sensation. Then one of the mediums said to me, she said, look, close your eyes. And I was standing there, maybe literally my back was touching the altar. And she said, close your eyes. And the next thing I felt, it was like something under my feet pushing me up from the floor. And I thought, wow. And I tried to lean back because I thought, I'm going to fall over here. So, yeah, the harder I leaned back, the more this pressure came up from the floor. And eventually I came off the floor and stumbled forward. And the medium says, wow. She said, what do you think of that? I said, what do I think? That the adrenaline was really pumping. So my wife, who was there, I said, Anne, I said, go stand there. Go and stand there. I didn't tell her what had happened to me or what I felt. And she went and stood there. And instantly her arms started drifting up from her sides. And she sort of looked at me and I thought, wow. And all this was captured on, at the time they didn't have digital recorders, but it was captured in video recorder. And the sad thing is, this incident, which I had cut on videotape, the BBC asked could they see this tape, and stupidly enough, I didn't make a copy of it and sent them. I sent the original, and they lost the tape. Yeah, they lost the tape. Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
So I don't have any visual.
That wasn't Bruce Burgess, was it?
Oh no. Yeah, no, I know Bruce. He
works for the BBC now.
Does he really? Yeah.
I think is it BBC Two? Isn't that where Forbidden History is? Isn't that on?
Oh no. That's on really. There's about 80 or 90 digital channels in the UK here.
Oh.
In fact, there's more than that, and they're all free to air, which is pretty good. They're all, but except for the BBC, they're all paid for by advertising, which is cool, which is fine. But no, Bruce did this show Forbidden History, and that goes out on a channel called Really. So he doesn't work for the BBC. No.
Oh, I see. But the BBC doesn't own that channel?
No.
Oh,
they're all no.
This is all boring TV stuff, but interesting. My listeners, many of them know Bruce Burgess was my business partner and the director and co-executive producer of Bloodline, the film, with me. So, and he's been on this show before. But anyhow, now, when you had those experiences, when you said you felt something pushing up, did you actually sort of levitate?
Yeah, I literally thought, I wasn't floating about in midair. And nothing crazy like that. But right. I was lifted physically off my feet, maybe about quarter of an inch just up off the floor, and I fell forward. So something pushed me up from the floor. So, like I say, my wife stood in the same spot. Her arms started floating up from her side. But this time, we were starting to attract a bit of attention, so I guess we had to stop doing what we were doing. But but the odd thing was that one of the other mediums who was there, and the really sensitive mediums were the females. They were picking up a lot of stuff in the chapel. That one of them said, and I can understand why she said this, she said that the chapel is not temporally stable. In other words, it exists 99.9% here, and 0.01% somewhere else. Okay, so the chapel is actually a bridging point between two realities, she thought. And it was around this time that there was I heard about the rumours of what was supposed to be buried in the vaults beneath the chapel. And one of the things that's supposed to be down there is literally and physically the gateway to heaven. Okay, some sort of gateway to heaven is down in the vaults. And I wondered if this was some sort of reflection or mention or somewhere putting the fact that there's a portal in the chapel, and as far as the elders were concerned, it was a gate. It was a stairway, not a stairway to heaven. That's Led Zeppelin, but a gateway to heaven.
That's like the church at Rennes Chateau. On the inscribed above the doorway is this place is terrible, and the end of that Bible verse, when you look it up, reads, and it is the gateway to heaven, and it's from the story of Jacob's ladder, where he goes climbs a ladder. Basically through a portal into heaven. And it's interesting. There are, other correlations between these two places, but I'm wondering what existed on that site before Rosslyn Chapel was built there. Was it a pagan site?
I wouldn't say, well, yeah. Originally, it's... there was it's thought, and like I said, there is no guarantee of this, but it is believed to have been a place of healing once upon a time. It's also believed to have been a site of a place where Celtic or Celtic Christianity was practiced, and because of these associations, it was selected by the Sinclair family to build the Rosslyn Chapel. But you got to remember that Rosslyn Chapel is just a name that's been given to it. Its real name, or the name it's currently known as, is the Collegiate Church of St. Matthew, hence St. Matthew altar. Oh. And and the thing is that, it's the Collegiate Church. It's a functioning Episcopalian church. It holds its services every Sunday. People get married there. So it's a functioning church, and you've got people who go there to carry out investigations such as we did, and I can assure you now it's not encouraged anymore by any manner of means, is that the people who go there to actually do anything, it has to be when there are no services planned, and all the sort of the people at the services are no longer there, and the place is sort of shut down. It's only then that you're allowed access to it to carry out any sort of walk rounds or investigations of any kind.
Yes. Well, that's sort of like many of the sites, particularly since the big explosion that the Da Vinci Code caused 10 years ago. There have been people going in droves to these locations, and many people go and want to practice their own rituals and things like that. And some of those sites aren't particularly friendly to that sort of thing. I've noticed.
Well, can I just say that when we first went there, although 1998 was the first, if you like, investigation we carried out, I only found out about the place through reading the book The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. And I first visited Rosslyn Chapel, I guess, in 1992. I'd never heard of it before then, which seems a bit very sad, but it's true. But when we first went there, there was a very, very, how can I put this? The feeling in the place was almost tangible. It's almost like as if you visit the Church of the Nativity in Israel. When you go down into that vault, into the cellars where the Church of the Nativity is, there's a tangible presence, there's a power. You can feel the actual power. It's almost as if you can taste and touch it. Well, Rosslyn Chapel used to be like that. When you went into the place, the feeling of presence was incredibly powerful. You felt you could cut pieces off it and put it in your pocket and take it away. It was so powerful. But I think as the number of people have gone there has picked up, as the footfall has increased going through the chapel, everybody has gone there. It's almost as if they've taken a tiny little particle away with it now. But for me, when I go into the chapel now, it's just going into another building. The sense of specialness, I think, has gone. I mean, the beauty of the architecture is still there and stuff. But as far as being a place of power is concerned, that's all dissipated. And I think it's just dissipated by people taking away parts of it with them as they visited. And I think that's a great shame. But I guess the flip side of this is it's opened up the chapel and the opportunities it represents to the many tens of thousands of people that have visited there. But what you said about the Da Vinci Code is actually quite strange, because my wife and I were visiting there just before they shot the chapel scenes, and they had actually laid on an extra long step ladder So I had gone to the Lady Chapel to take photographs of the cubes which are up in the ceiling.
Oh,
and
right.
and the chippies and the carpenters, they were carrying sheets of hardboard and gyprock and all the rest of it down the stairs into the crypt to actually build the set. So it seems a bit strange to see the guys doing this, but we were actually there when they were building the set for the Da Vinci Code.
Oh, wow. That's pretty amazing. Yeah, that book and subsequent film really spoke to a lot of people. Of course, you and I were into this mystery long before that. I think my entree into this particular material was by Holy Blood, Holy Grail in 1982 by Bagent Lee and Lincoln, of course.
Yeah.
So in the Da Vinci Code, of course, I read it because I was in the midst of a project. I was in the midst of the Bloodline project already before the Da Vinci Code even came out. And so I recognized bits of it, and I realized this is going to cause a big wave of interest in this subject matter. And of course it did. It was the best-selling novel of all time. And I got to give Dan Brown credit for that, because he put bits of information and history in there that were very tantalizing and recognizable enough to people that knew a little bit about it. But he wrapped it up in an adventure story that was palatable to a very, very broad audience. Whereas, Holy Blood, Holy Grail was kind of a penitential read, but if you're into the subject matter, you read it anyway. Even Henry admits
that. Oh, yeah. I mean, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, I mean, it was actually, there were people visiting us that they'd come across, for a couple of drinks and just some conversation. And the guy had brought Holy Blood, Holy Grail with him. And, he left it with me to read, and I was absolutely fascinated by it. And eventually I bought my own copy. And I was at a meeting of the Son Air Society because, I think we mentioned this when we were doing that last show, the Son Air Society.
Sure.
And Henry was giving a presentation at it, and I got him to sign the book, obviously, get him to, put his name on it. And, but the books like the Temple and the Lodge and the other books that came after Holy Blood, Holy Grail, they're pretty interesting as well.
Oh yeah, they were. I had an opportunity to work with Michael Bagent at some length. He came over to the United States and worked with actually Bruce Burgess and I on the project. It was this sort of it's what Bloodline developed out of. It was actually a television project that ended up getting shelved by Fox Studios, not because of any controversy, just because of, in-studio politics. The president left, and all the executives that were working on our project went behind her, so our project just kind of withered. But Michael went back to the UK, or actually, I think he was living in Mallorca at the time, and Bruce and I just sort of looked at each other and said, well, what do we do now? So we said, we got to keep going. So we ended up raising the funds to do a 5-year investigation and documentary film. So that's how that all came about. But certainly Michael Bagent, the Temple and the Lodge, and some of his subsequent books were very interesting as well. The Inquisition book that he wrote was good historical piece. But anyhow, it looks like we are about ready to take a break here. So before we go off to break, Brian, I had your website up. Let me see if I still have it up here. I guess I don't. So it's Brian J. Allan .home.
No, it's hyphen home.
home.uk.
.co.uk.
Oh, gosh, I really butchered that up again. Okay, it's Brian J. Allan, ALLAN.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more with Brian J. Allan. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Night Vision. I'm your host, René Barnett. If you're just joining us, my guest tonight is Brian J. Allan. He is an author, a paranormal researcher, the editor of Phenomena magazine, and we've been talking about Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Of course, many of you know lots about Rosslyn. A lot of you probably been there, and those of you who are Da Vinci Code fans may have learned about it the first time when reading the Da Vinci Code. But old hats like Brian and myself, we knew about it a long time ago. Now, I mentioned Rennes Chateau and the church there, and I also asked you, what was there at Rosslyn before that particular church was built there. And because I know many of these churches, these Christian churches, are built on, old pagan sites. And they used to say, we're stamping out paganism. We're going to build our church over this site and wipe it out. But, what I'm beginning to more and more think is that they wanted those particular sites that had been taken advantage of for years or even centuries by other groups, because they knew that there was something interesting there in the makeup of the land itself, or that particular location. Do you sort of agree with that? Do you see that as a possibility, that what it really was that they were trying to take that power of that particular location or whatever it was to use for their own purposes?
Oh, yes, that's entirely possible. Well, as I said earlier, that the location was used as a site for a Celtic Christian church. The thing is that Jesus, of course, wasn't born on the 25th of December, as you probably know. He was born. Yeah.
But that's why they took that date. The 25th, in honor of Mithras. But I think a lot of these sites probably were, there was some reason other than the apparent one why these churches and cathedrals are located in certain places. Now, you talked about, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the Chartres Cathedral, for example, in Paris, it is built on a conjunction of ley lines. It's built on a conjunction of underground water tracks, underground water streams. So the whole thing, that all these buildings, the old buildings, not so much the new ones, but the old ones were built on areas that were noted to have some sort of, I'm saying this in inverted commas, spiritual power. Although what that spiritual power was probably down to earth energies of one kind or another,
It seems that the water source part is an important component to these sites. I've been to Chartres, and down under Chartres there's a water, as you mentioned, a water source. There's also in Saint-Sulpice in Paris. We were able to sneak down in the bottom, and there's a deep well down there, which we were surprised to find, or maybe not so surprised, but that does seem to be an important element, alchemically or whatever it is that they're looking for there. But you mentioned that when you were in Rosslyn and in I'm sure other places, that you've had paranormal experiences of your own. And and one person, Sky, in the chat room was asking a question, do you have any thoughts on why so-called paranormal events or UFOs, whatever, seem to appear to some people and not others?
Well, yes. Some people are attuned to it. It's as simple as that. I mean, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything mysterious about it. It's just some people are more prone to seeing these things because they're attuned, or they're more open-minded, or sympathetic, or more, if you like, in harmony with what's going on around about them. But I also think, and I found this to be the case, that the longer that I hung around with mediums, psychics, people like that, and the more of these paranormally themed or influenced places that I visited, that the more sensitive I became. So now that things happen to me on a pretty regular basis, that I just sort of shrug and say, yeah, well, there it's again. So I mean, I don't take it as being anything as being particularly unusual now. I just take it as partial life. And so I think that these things happen to people who are open-minded enough to accept it. The skeptics and the debunkers, and I've no doubt this happens to them as well, but what they'll do with their dying breath is deny all knowledge and say it's got to be rational, simply because I think they're frightened to let go of their own rationality, because their rationality, if you like, becomes a form of religion. And they make themselves slaves to that, and it just shuts their eyes to what's going on around about them, sadly.
Interesting. I've often wondered that same thing myself. It's like I'm always thinking, oh, I want to see the UFO, I want to see the ghost, I want to, have the experience. And I certainly do, have what I feel like are intuitive experiences, certainly with my family, my kids, and at other times too. And there are certain locations I've noticed where, like you mentioned, how it used to feel at Rosslyn Chapel, and by contrast, I don't know if you've ever been to Saint Cecile Cathedral in Albi in France.
No, I haven't. No,
but in that place, in the upstairs area, was where they would sort of torture the so-called heretics. And there's a very strange-looking mural that surrounds the altar, and it's people, suffering and burning in hell. And when you walk into that place, it's a very oppressive feeling.
Oh, yeah.
So much so that I've taken people back there that wanted to go, and I wouldn't go back inside.
I know exactly what you're talking about. We were once on a case at an old church up towards the north of Scotland, and the people, or the person who was taking us round, took us into this room, and it was used where they used to incarcerate, well, shall I say, people who were mentally infirm, but back in the Dark Ages. And you only had to walk into this room, and it was like being hit in the gut with a baseball bat. The room itself, it seemed to absorb all the negativity, the sadness, the suffering, the madness of the people who were in there. And I just had to walk back out again because it just so profoundly, I wanted to cry as soon as I walked into this room. But the guy at the time, the guy didn't tell us what it had been used for. But when he saw my reaction, he explained, he said people who are sensitive get this impression in this room because, like I say, it's where they used to lock up people who were crazy. And they used to be there till they died. They used to keep them there till they died, the poor souls. And that's always picking up on, I guess.
And worse than that, sometimes they weren't crazy. Sometimes maybe they had paranormal experiences and people thought they were crazy. Can you imagine being locked up in a place like that and being in your right mind? I'm sure you wouldn't be for long.
Oh no. I mean, they fed them and stuff, and I guess if they thought they were safe enough, they'd let them back into the community, or if they had paranormal experiences and they denied it and they said, "Oh, we only imagined it." No, it just didn't happen. I believe in Jesus and God and all the rest of it. They'd maybe let them back out again. But while they were back inside there, they were. I guess they were. It was pretty harrowing, pretty sad, because I mean it was just a bare stone room, and there was a little slit window you could actually see down into the street, but there was a door and a little slit window, and there was like a stone bench I got along the wall, but that was it. Very, very bleak, very, very sad, very, very depressing place.
Oh, I can imagine. You know, you mentioned to me before the show that you have something called the Phenomena Project. Can
Oh,
you
yeah.
tell me about that? Because it sounded pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, before I was editing Phenomena magazine, I also edited a newsstand magazine called Paranormal. And Paranormal magazine, obviously, you attracted quite a few people. And a guy got in contact with me, a guy called Don Phillips. And Don made some pretty big claims about what he was experiencing. He was in contact with this entity, and he was in regular contact. It helped him, and it helped him to combat demons and all the rest of it. And I thought, wow, and I thought, yeah. So I said, well, I got back to him. I emailed him back and said, well, big claims need a lot of proof, and can you do that? So I got my telephone number. We talked to each other for a while, and I got to think, well, maybe this guy's got something here. And I introduced him to another friend of mine. He's actually the CEO of Phenomena magazine, a guy called Steve Mira. He's been in that show that we were both on, by the way, that last week there. And Steve and Don introduced him at a conference we were speaking at. And they sort of hit it off. And Steve was a bit skeptical about what Don could claim that he could do. But he went with him on a few cases, and he suddenly realised that, yeah, and Steve, I might add, he's a trained parapsychologist, so the guy knows what he's talking about. So he suddenly realised that Don could do what he was saying he could do, and the Phenomena Project was born. And basically, what the Phenomena Project is we're attempting to scientifically demonstrate that there is a parallel reality alongside our own, and that this life that we're in is, if you like, it's just a station on the way there. And that when we die, we pass over into this. But it's in doing so that we've uncovered some really wide-ranging ideas, some thoughts on the subject, and some stuff that's quite surprising as well. For example, the entity that Don Phillips communicates with, and he communicates with this entity using mostly Olympus digital recorders. And this entity kind of is replying to him just as clear as I'm talking to you. This isn't the usual nonsense that you see in, well, I won't name them and maybe run into litigation, but on certain TV shows where where EVPs are like mutters and mumbles and little hisses, and you've got to be told what they're saying. Otherwise, that's all it is, a hiss or a click or a mutter or a mumble. These are words like I'm talking to you. It's as clear as this, that this entity, sometimes they're quite quiet, and sometimes they're quite loud, and sometimes the entity's talking out of midair as well. But mostly it's via these digital recorders. And the thing that this entity is telling us, or the things that it's telling us, are quite remarkable, because it seems to be predictive. It seems to be to see into the future a little bit. And it seems to be able to tell us things that are going to happen. But more at the point, the entity calls itself, or it said its name was Becky Michaels, and it had been a doctor. It had been killed with its kid, or she had been killed with her two children in either a plane or a train crash, and that somehow a case that Don had been on, that she had latched onto him. And and they've been together, I guess, since for about the past 10 years. That's how long he's been communicating with her. And she travels with him to his different cases and sort of helps him out. But it turns out that there's more than her. There are several of these entities that have attached themselves to Don, and they all communicate with him via these digital recorders. Now, the odd thing is, what we have tried to do is through physical experimentation, shield the recorders from any possible source of electromagnetic radiation. In other words, they're not receiving signals via radio or microwave or anything else. They're put inside sometimes Faraday cages. They're wrapped up in tin foil. They're wrapped up in tin foil, put inside a Faraday cage, and still the voices get through. We've wrapped them up in polythene bags. We've put them in the bottom of buckets of water. We've held them under the water. We've done all sorts of stuff. But the thing is, the voices are always getting put on the recorders. It's almost as if the voices were being synthesized and placed in the digital recording chips of the recorders themselves. And when this happens, the voices, the quality of the voice changes, but the voice is still there and it's still clear. So as far as we're concerned, that there is a reality out there and it is in contact with us. But, and here is the big problem with this, that as far as this Becky Michaels is concerned, I warned Dawn right from the start, be careful, be so careful what you're doing, because this thing may not be what it says it is. Now, we've done some checking, and as far as we're concerned, this Becky Michaels is not what it says. We think it's something else. It insinuates, or it claims to be angelic. Maybe it is. It depends how you define an angel. But we certainly think, or I believe, this thing is not human, and it's never been human. And but it certainly is in contact with Dawn. Steve's heard it as well. They were asked to go over to a case in Seattle, to investigate a case in Seattle, and they did. And on the way back, for like 40,000 feet on the aircraft coming back, the voice spoke to them. Steve looked at Dawn, and Dawn said, yeah, that's Becky. And this thing was speaking out of midair between the two of them in an aircraft at 40,000 feet. And they both heard this.
Oh, my gosh. Now, let me ask you about this digital recorder. Did you just place it and turn it on? Did you just place it in the room and not turn it on? Did you ask questions and then wait for an answer? How did that work?
Well, what usually happens is that Dawn will take it's a specific, well, it doesn't really matter, but Olympus is obviously one of the biggest manufacturers of these recorders.
Right.
And it's a particular model that he uses, although I think it can work on any recorder, any digital recorder. And what Dawn does is he'll switch on, ask a question. He always waits for 10 seconds, switches off, then plays back. But he always leaves this window of 10 seconds for the reply to take place, and 99 times of 100 it does. Sometimes we've found out that the answers are enigmatic, to say the best. Sometimes the answer is that they're not allowed to tell us for some reason, because the information we're, I quote, not ready to know, which is very frustrating. But it turns out, and I've actually independently verified this, nothing to do with Dawn, nothing to do with Steve. I've actually carried out my own investigations into this. And it appears that this phenomenon of not being allowed to say or not being allowed to tell us is not just confined to what this Becky says. I'm using the term Becky because it's the only sort of handle I've got for it, so I'll call it Becky.
Right.
Yeah, but the thing is that there appears to be a hierarchy over there on the other side. In fact, it's to say the other side, better call it another dimension, really, because I don't think it's nothing to do with spirit. This is to do with energy flow and energy transmission. That this other dimension has things that govern what goes on there. Don calls them lightertons, and this is the name that he's been given, that these things can, when he's having a conversation with Becky, suddenly these things will blast through the conversation and the voices drown out Becky's completely, and they'll just say enough, and they'll shut the whole thing down, almost as if there's too much info. In fact, I'm starting to go stone cold now, so I think someone's just turned up in the room with me. Maybe listening in for all we know. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. It's happened before. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So what actually happens is these things communicate, and they actually decide what can be said, what can't be said. Now, I've independently verified this from other sources who don't know Don, don't know Steve, don't know anything about the Phenomena Project, but they're having the same experiences. They're coming back with the same stories, as that they're in contact with whatever's on this other dimension, but there's only so much information that we could be given. And if there's anything too sensitive, it will be shut down and we will not be told, because way back in about the 1980s, 1990s, there was something called the Skull Experiment, was started down in England.
I was just going to ask you if you knew about the Skull Experiments, because...
oh, yeah.
Yes, I'm very familiar with that. And in fact, they actually, that group, the Skull Group, as you may know, did sort of a tour of the United States, and they were here in Los Angeles. Now, I didn't see them when they were here. I did have friends who were present at some of their, sittings, as they called them, and there was some amazing phenomena that happened, and I heard about it, and I thought, oh, that sounds crazy. I don't believe that. And then someone came to me there was a book written about it by a couple named, their last name was Solomon. And
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they sent someone to me at my office and was, wanting to know if I was interested in doing a documentary or a television program about it. And I was partners with Bruce Burgess at the time, and Bruce was in England at the time, so he went and visited with the Skull group at the time himself. So yes, but for those who may not know what the Skull experiments was, it was a group, it was two couples in England in a village called Skull, and thus the Skull experiments, and they started trying to communicate with other dimensions, the other side, whatever. And they started getting a lot of responses. They started being instructed to snap pictures, in pitch blackness. And then when the film was developed, there would be images on the film. And then at some point, they were even told just to put the camera on the table. And they didn't even have to snap the pictures. The film would be developed. Actually, Kodak, the film company, got involved with them and was sending them sealed canisters of film and would take them back and develop them and verify that they hadn't been tampered with. And at one point, then they were just instructed to set the film canister on the table and these pictures would appear. Now, is this what you're saying kind of happened? And they also had some recordings that were quite clear. Just like, and in fact, I talked to a gentleman here in Los Angeles who had communicated with a friend of his, he said, who spoke to him through this recorder during this Skull session. And he was convinced that it was his friend who had just not too long before been killed in a car accident. So is that sort of how you did it with the digital recorder and this Becky phenomena?
Yeah, it's something very similar to that. As far as what happened to the Skull experiment is concerned, the bit you're leaving out is that they had to shut it down because the other side told them to shut it down because it was getting too dangerous for them. Not for the other side, but it was getting too dangerous for them because apparently, and again, the people you were talking about, Grant and Jane Solomon, were people who wrote the Skull experiment.
Yes.
Yeah. The thing is that there was so much information coming to them. In fact, they were actually given instructions on how to build this electronic device to aid the communication system. Is that there was so much information getting to them that other things were starting to take an interest because, as well as the dimension that contains, well, the entities that the Skull group, and Robin Foy was the guy that he was the facilitator for that, Robin Foy. Yeah, that what was actually going on there was that they were getting so much information that there was too much information getting brought across, and that the dimension that they were in communication with was also where there were other dimensions out there, a whole series of them, okay, each inhabited by a different set of entities. And it was the other entities that didn't like what was going on. And they were actually threatening the entities that the Skull group were in contact with to stop telling what they were, to stop saying what they were saying, basically, and shut down communications because it was getting too dangerous all round. So they had to shut down the Skull experiment because they were told to do so. But as far as we're concerned with the Phenomena Project, we are starting where Skull left off. And we're trying to bring proof positive that cannot be debunked, that cannot be set to one side, that there is a set of phenomena in existence now that is real, that can be communicated with, and the whole thing is that it's real and it's demonstrable. And I think it brings a lot of comfort. It brings comfort to us because we know that this is not the end, that we do go on after this, absolutely.
That's amazing. How exciting. Now, so this work is ongoing?
It still is. I mean, it's still ongoing right now.
And now, is this what your next book is going to be about?
It's going to be about that. It's going to be about the physics of the paranormal as we see it. There's a chapter devoted to the physics of the paranormal because there are certain aspects of the paranormal that where the physics involved are quite staggering. Well, I'm also going to be talking about individual cases that Don and Steve have been involved with, where Becky has actually actively helped them, especially the case in Seattle, where Don was actually attacked by demons just outside the town of Bothell, which is a suburb of Seattle. And he was actually challenged by demons to come to their side, that he should not be on this side, he should be with them, he should throw their lot in with them and all the rest of it. And it got quite nasty for a while. And Steve Steve told Don, he said, look, he said, you better stop this or I'm out of here. He was standing 20 feet away, and Don was having the struggle with whatever these things were. And Steve could hear, he was 20 feet away, and he could hear the answers coming through the recorder that Don had in his hand. They were that clear. And these things were threatening Don and all the rest of it. So it can get pretty hairy, and it's pretty clear that there is a constant struggle going on between these entities for possession of us, if you like. But we are trying to prove conclusively that this dimension is out there, and it can be proved and demonstrated, and we're quite happy to defend it against all comers.
Wow, that is amazing and a little bit scary. Gosh, I think this is a good time to take a quick break and let me have a think about that. When we come back, more with Brian J. Allan and scary stuff. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Night Vision. I'm your host, René Barnett. With me is Brian J. Allan. He's just been telling me about the Phenomenon Project, and I tell you, I'm almost speechless. It was just not a good idea, not a good thing to be when you're doing radio, you know. But that was very, very strange. Now, I got a couple questions for you about about your recordings. Now, you said this entity identified itself as a female person, a Becky Michaels, which you believe now is just a nom de plume, something that they just use. To me, it almost seems like maybe they chose a woman because it might be less threatening. And you say, oh, I'm a mom who, you know, I died in an accident with my children. It's kind of a sympathetic figure. So maybe, you know, you might be more likely to talk to someone like that than if they obviously identify themselves as who they really are. But when you heard the voice, okay, I guess the Becky Michaels voice was a feminine voice?
Oh, yes, it was indeed, yeah. It is a feminine voice. In fact, the way that it's been described to me, when Steve Mera heard the voice for the first time, he said the power in this voice literally nearly knocked him off his feet. It was this poof, it like a wave of emotion hit him. Very, very strange. It hit him almost, he said it was. Now, Steve has been in contact with poltergeists, all sorts of stuff for many, many years. So this is nothing new to him. But the impact of this voice talking to him, it wasn't the fact it was a female voice or what it said. It was the emotional impact of the voice nearly knocked him on the floor. And he said that a couple of times. That to hear this thing talk to you, is the voice is indescribably beautiful. It's powerful. And it carries this immense emotion with it. And that's the best way you could describe it. But yeah, whatever this thing is, it's choosing to portray itself, as you suggest, in the most sympathetic manner as it can, I guess.
Now, you said that, you know, of course, there was a lot of things that, you know, when you would ask, it would say, you're not ready to hear this, or we're not going to mention this, and they'll shut you down if, you know, if they're saying too much. But what were some of the things that they were telling you or were telling Don? What kind of information were they sharing?
Okay. Well, basically, it's when you start asking too many pointed questions about the nature of their reality. Because one of the things that this Becky, and I'm going to keep using the word Becky.
Sure.
One of the things that it's actually said is that not everyone gets to the other side. Okay, that when we die, not everyone gets to the other side. Now, this is all in the book, and the statement is in the book. Now, Steve actually mentioned this. I think he wrote an article, and Steve Mera, the guy, is the guy's name. He wrote this article, and some clergyman, I think it was a priest, got a hold of this information, and he contacted Steve. He said, you shouldn't be telling people this, that not everyone makes it, almost as if he knows that everyone doesn't make it. Now, this of course leads to other questions. Who doesn't make it? Why don't they make it? And what becomes of them? But this is the sort of questions that when we start probing this, we get shut down. We don't get answers to this. So it's very frustrating, and it's things that I think we need to know. But one of the things I did ask in one of the conversations I've had with Becky is that I said, is there any connection between yourself and the Watchers and the Nephilim and entities like that? And the answer that came back was, again, very, very enigmatic. The answer I got back was, I'm on the right lines. And that was it. There was no more clarification on that there seems to be some connection with the Watchers, the Nephilim, the interbreeding between these entities, these entities from heaven and human women that produce beings in this world who are the Nephilim. I was on the right lines, but exactly what that means, there is no clarification. We just don't know.
You mentioned that it seems that they're somewhat prescient or predictive about some of the things. Can you give an example of that?
Well, for example, about 6 months before they went to visit Seattle in the USA, it was actually, I'll give you a bit of the background to this case. It was a guy called Keith Linda. And if you ever look up, if you ever Google Demons in Seattle, it'll bring up information about the case. It was the Ghost Adventures team. I think you probably know them, Zach Bagans and these guys. They all went along. Yeah, they went along to the Seattle house, this house in Bothell, which is just a suburb of Seattle. They went along, investigated the case, said there was nothing there, and left. Now, the thing is, there was so much evidence that I've got to be careful what I'm saying here, but it appears there was so much evidence that they ignored. But eventually, this entity, Becky, said about 6 months before this, she just said to Don, "You're going to Seattle." And and he said, "What?" And that was it. And he did. He went to Seattle. So, and
he had no idea at that time that he was going to be going to Seattle?
No, not a clue. They had no intentions of going to America, didn't know anything about it. And it turned out they were actually asked to go to Seattle. Oh. And they've also been told that they're going to Germany. And there's nothing that they know about that they are going to Germany, but she's told them they're going to Germany. And she's also predicted a couple of times things that were going to happen, and they have happened. I can't remember them precisely offhand, but there's been 2 or 3 things have been told to them that you're going to do this, you're going to be doing that, and they did. So
when I grow up, I want to make a pizza with the most cheese and the most pepperoni at the nation's best price, $6. It's going to be the best pizza ever.
Sorry, kid, it's been done. Introducing the new Little Caesars Extra Most Bestest Pizza. A large pizza with the most cheese and the most pepperoni at the nation's best price.
But my mom said...
Shh! This much cheese and pepperoni is what dreams are made of. Come get a large, hot and ready Extra Most Bestest Pizza for just $6, only at Little Caesars.
Pizza.
At participating locations plus tax.
These entities are creating the situation by which this happens. In other words, they're editing reality, if you like, or they're able to see that little bit into the future to know this is what is going to happen. So it's very difficult to work out what we're actually dealing with here. But whatever it is we're dealing with, it seems to know what we're all about and what's actually happening on our side of reality, whereas we seem to know very little about what's happening on their side of reality, and it makes it very frustrating. But I've tried to deal with a lot of this in the book, especially in the physics of the paranormal, and a lot of this stuff. But the problem is a lot of what's in the book is a bit speculative, but we have no choice other than to speculate because we just don't know for sure. Because anyone that tells me that they know the answer to all this, anyone that tells me that, I run away screaming. Where are we screaming from? Yeah, because they don't know. I mean, anyone who says they do know, they don't know, because I find out on a daily basis that I don't know. I find out more that I don't know. But I try and find out, but it's very, very difficult.
Oh gosh! Now, did you find any of the information that you were getting from this entity or others via that same project to be instructional or helpful?
Yeah, well, Don certainly has, because these entities, by the sounds of things, have actually saved him from things happening to him. He's actually had encountered encounters. I spoke about this demonic contact they had while they were over in Bothell near Seattle. This contact I had with these demons, and apparently these entities that he's in league with or in contact with actively help him and try and save him from any damage that's caused. But for all that, I have kept telling him, be very, very careful, because if these things are not what they seem to be, if they are themselves demonic, and they're maybe part of a higher hierarchy of demons, then they would make the ones who are below them move away. So they would exert a method of control over them. So I keep telling them that these things have infinite patience. They're the greatest liars in the world, that they will do anything they have to do to get him. And this appears to be, I mean, he's had these things, the negative entities turn up in his home, saying they know who he is, they're coming to get him, they're going to get him, and all the rest of it. They can wait and they can get him. And this Becky always seems to turn up and get rid of them for him. So it's a very strange relationship. Like I say, it's very mysterious. I don't know what the answers are, and I don't pretend that I do. But all I can do is try and record the facts as I see them, as they're presented to me, and give them some sort of context, and try it and get the information out there. But all I can give is information, but what I can't give you is definitive answers, because I don't think there are any, and we wouldn't know that until we finally pass to the other side, and perhaps we might find out then, and perhaps even not then. Maybe there are other levels that we have to go through on the other side.
Wow. Now, how long had this been going on with Don when he contacted you?
I guess 3 or 4 years before he contacted me. This wasn't a recent thing. Apparently, this entity, Becky, turned up at a house that he was in. He was investigating a case. He used to run a paranormal group, investigation group, and she turned up. He actually asked, could you raise the temperature in this room or drop the temperature in this room? And the temperature dropped. Could you raise it again? And it came up again. Always it was getting measured in instrumentation. And this entity introduced itself as Becky, and it's been with him ever since. And it's with him all the time. It likes flowers, believe it or not. He buys it flowers, and it knows the flowers have been bought, and it tells him it knows the flowers have been bought, and it appreciates it. And it's really it's a very strange relationship, because it gives all the indications of being female, because it appears to have female traits. But again, who knows? It could be just a front it's putting on. We just don't know. All I know is that Don is quite happy with the situation. He's quite at ease and comfortable with the situation. But I'm not sure if I would be. But nevertheless, it's nothing to do with me. All I can do is try and record the events as they occur, and get them out there for the public to eventually make judgment upon and decide for themselves.
I'm guessing Don is not married.
Yes, he is.
Oh my gosh! Does his wife like the situation?
I've asked this situation. I've asked this myself, and apparently his wife, I won't name her, but apparently his wife's aware of it, and I think she just goes with it, because I don't think she sees this thing as a threat.
Oh my goodness. That is very, very weird. Now, so I'm assuming that there are a lot of recordings of these voices.
Yes, there are. There's quite a lot online as well.
Oh my goodness. I'd love to hear some sometime. I wonder if Don would share any of those if he were to come on this show.
I think he probably would. And in fact, probably the best person to ask about this would be Steve Mira. Steve, I'm sure, would come on your show as well, because Steve is better versed in the parapsychological side of things than I am. So he'd be able to give you actual. I've heard some of these recordings that were made in in Bothell, and they are as clear as I'm talking to you. It's almost as if there was two things having a conversation about nothing to do with it, and the guys were just picking this up. And it was so strange, because it didn't seem to bear any relationship to what was going on. It was just two entities having a conversation. And it was clear it wasn't the fire service, it wasn't ambulance, it wasn't emergency services or the police. This was something it just was not related to this time era and this time. It was just two entities having a conversation about something else. It was just so strange, and I know that Steve has this recording. In fact, he sometimes uses it at presentations that he gives, and it's well worth hearing. So I can put you in contact with Steve as well if you wish.
Oh, absolutely. That would be fabulous. I'd love to keep track of what's going on with the project, and then, obviously the book that's going to be coming forward out of it. When do you think that book will be published?
Hopefully sometime this year.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It should be out this year sometime. It's with an outfit called White Crow Publishing, and it's a guy called John Beecher who actually runs that. And John's a pretty open-minded guy, and he's put out some pretty good stuff as well in the course of his publications. So it's with White Crow just now. They're evaluating it. They've asked to see the whole manuscript, so I sent the whole manuscript to them. I emailed it to them, and they're having a look at that just now. So hopefully, all being well, the book should be out later this year.
Oh, that's just amazing. That is so fantastic. Well, now, once this book is done, is that the end of your connection to the project?
No, because the project it's volume 1. It's the Phenomenal Project, volume 1. So what we'll keep doing is amassing information, writing it up. So it's an ongoing project, yeah.
And so, if you don't mind me asking, is this in Scotland, where Don is located?
He actually is located in a city called Leicester, which is in the Midlands of England. So so Don, Steve is in Manchester, Don's in Leicester, and I'm stuck up here in Scotland. So the logistics of getting together are very difficult. We've got to actually make a point if we're going to get together to actually to make it. But mostly we just talk by telephone or Skype or whatever.
So Leicester is where, in the Midlands?
Leicester, yeah. It's a town of Leicester. It's somewhere in the Midlands of England, the best I can do.
Yeah. Or Leicester, as we would call it here in the United States.
Well, no, you would call Leicester.
Yeah, that's more like it.
Yeah.
How exciting is this? Now, is this sort of your first exposure to this type of electronic voice phenomena?
As clear as this, yeah. I mean, I've been aware of EVPs, for a long time, but not as clear as this. This is the first time I've heard EVPs that were that clear. You didn't have to be told what they were saying, because when I come across EVPs, like on TV shows and stuff, where they run like a text banner underneath it, showing you what's being said, and then you can actually, and sometimes even then it doesn't really sound like it. That's when I started saying, whoa, that could mean anything. That could be anything. But the communications we're getting are so clear that, there is no mistake that this is a voice, and it's answering you, and it's responding to specific questions. They aren't just random words. These are answers to specific, detailed questions, and what you're getting back is detailed, specific answers. So, yeah, there is a two-way communication.
It seems like there's a couple of things going on. Like you said, a two-way communication. And then you said that at one point it just sounded like a conversation between, two people or two entities that really had nothing to do with your project. So it seems like there might be, it might be a way of sort of like tapping in, not just to, connect directly with an entity, but maybe just tapping into that particular dimension and sort of eavesdropping or overhearing something. It sounds like that.
Well, yes, that's exactly it. It's almost as if he was wiretapping the conversation. But something else occurred during the same investigation in Seattle, is that they set up a night vision camera in Keith Linder's house. They set up it's an FLIR. It's a front-looking infrared camera, FLIR. They set one of these things up, and the EVP that came back was, this is just so weird. They just set up, they came downstairs, they switched on the recorder, And the voice that came back was, "It's a camera, infrared." And wow, these things knew what the camera was, and they knew what its function was. And you start saying to yourself, obviously technology must develop on their side as well, because it appears there is a technology on their side. We just don't understand what it is, because the implications of that technology are absolutely immense, absolutely astounding. In fact, there was an illustration I was going to give you of the kind of technology they actually have on the other side. But it's one of these things when you're in a conversation like this, it's just gone. But there are absolutely technologies in use on their side that we have no parallel for on this side. That there is no analog for them on this side. But there's some really strange stuff going on out there.
What makes you say? What is the evidence of technology there?
The fact that they're able to communicate with us, the fact that they're able to synthesize voices and put them on recorders, okay, that are inside Faraday cages that are wrapped up in foil, every kind of shielding method possible, they're still able to put the voice into that recorder. Now, sometimes these voices purport to be relations of the person who is being communicated with. But the voice sounds nothing like the person, although the communication that's coming through is only relevant to that person. Only they would know that. Now, this seems to indicate that somehow the voices are being synthesized on their side and placed across. I think it's called instrumental transcommunication, is the sort of fans, or ITC. They don't call it EVPs now, it's called ITC, instrumental transcommunication, which is probably a better description of what it is. But they seem to be able to actually somehow take their voice, or take the energy of that voice and place it into the recorder. Because if you think about it, how can something that has got no material shape or form move the air to create the sound waves that we communicate by? Now, but they're able to do this and put that voice on a recorder that's underwater, it's sealed in a bag, every form of shielding they've tried to use has been, these things have still communicated with them. And so they're using a form of technology to do this. Even the Skoll people, as we mentioned, they were actually told to design this particular piece of equipment to help with the communications. So the other side is aware that technology is on our side. They have their technology, and somehow they try and marry the two together. They create an interface. So yes, there is definitely, I'm calling it spiritual technology, but that's only for a lack of the proper vocabulary. I mean, I don't really know how they do it, but it has to be some form of technology. Otherwise, we couldn't make head or tail of how they do it.
Did you notice when you did go all those extra steps underwater, in a bag, all that, did you notice any diminished quality?
Yes.
In the recordings? So it did make it more difficult for them.
Well, it altered the quality.
Which also actually that really points toward technology, because if it was just magic, then it would just be the same quality. But if they're actually having to use some sort of technology, I would imagine certain things would affect that technology.
Well, what you've just said is actually what Arthur C. Clarke once said, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And so it is, because I also think that magic is another form of technology, but that's another different conversation altogether. But but yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the quality of the voice didn't change. The clarity didn't change, but the sound quality changed, almost as if it was functioning differently. There's the best way. It wasn't functioning poorly. It just functioned differently, and the quality of the sound changed, but the clarity didn't change, and that's the important thing. So they were still able to transmit and synthesize the voice into that into that recorder. But we have also found that when you were dealing with so-called poltergeist effects, the sound quality alters radically there as well. That voices that are heard during poltergeist manifestations have, and also noises, bumps and thumps and bangs and stuff, they have a very strange sound quality to them as well, that they don't obey the sounds that you would hear. If, say, for example, you dropped a cup on the floor and recorded it, it would have a specific sound. But if this sort of thing happens and it's a poltergeist effect, the sound quality is somehow different. It rises and falls, it peaks and falls differently somehow. That it's almost as if something very strange is. The other thing is that poltergeist movement, when something is thrown from a poltergeist action, it is never seen raising up, travelling, then falling. It's always seen in motion, and it's only when it's seen that it falls to the floor. Now, there seems to be that somehow you're interacting with it, and it can't operate once it's been watched. It's the old story about the so-called twin slit experiment. We're going to we don't really have time for this now because I'm aware of the time. But the twin slit experiment, the twin slit experiment seems to exactly encapsulate what I'm talking about here. Is that photons behave differently when they're being watched and when they're not, and even the debunkers. Get people like Brian Cox, Professor Brian Cox, a very, 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 very intelligent man, a great communicator. Even he can't explain why the twin slit experiment does what it does. That's why should looking at a particle change what it does? It's almost as if the particle is aware that you're watching it, so it behaves differently. And the same thing seems to occur when poltergeist movement is observed. That as soon as you see that piece of that item, whatever it is, it will fall to the floor. And it always falls in a strange arc. All very strange stuff, but it all seems to hint at some sort of interconnectedness of everything, that the technology seems to be interconnected, that we are connected to it, and it is connected to us at some incredibly subtle level. And I mean, don't ask me for an answer because I don't have one. Like I say, all we can do, and all I do, is I collect the facts, I write them up, and I present them to the public and say, what do you think? And perhaps in doing this, we may find someone who'll come up with an answer. We can only hope so.
Oh, absolutely. I love that idea. That's, I think, as much information as we can get out there, you're right, someone else may have another piece of the puzzle. They might have that one bit that's going to make everything fall into place. You never know. But gosh, I'm really excited to hear about what goes on in the future with this project. And I will have Don and Steve on, and maybe even you could join them coming back when the book comes out. I would love that. That would be fabulous.
Well, what I'll do is I'll drop you an email. I'll copy Steve and Don in it, and you can talk to them.
Oh, fabulous. That would be great. Yeah, we'll do that soon. And I'll make connection with them very, very soon. And we'll get right on that. I would love to do that. So thank you so much for joining us. Now, if you don't mind, give out, the music's rolling, so give out your website one more time so people can find all your wonderful work.
Okay, my website is www.brianjallan-home.co.uk. And the magazine is www.phenomenamagazine.co.uk. The magazine's free to download, and anyone's please come along, help yourself.
Oh, wow. Thanks so much, Brian. I really appreciate you coming on, and hope to have you back very, very soon. Good night, everybody.